Bravo, Magdalena and Amy. Really beautiful, compelling, committed performance. Can you hear me? Everything okay?
Yeah.
A lot of things I really loved. Magdalena, especially at the very opening, can be treacherous for like bow control, especially when we're nervous. And I felt like you were really sort of a master of your own emotions and your own nerves. Whatever nerves you might have been feeling were not apparent. So I know how difficult that can be, and you really handled that beautifully. And totally sincere, committed playing, which I really admire. Whenever we deal with a theme and variations, not just this one, but in general, theme and variations, kind of often what the composer has in mind is highlighting different emotions, different moods, different elements of the theme in each subsequent variation. And I think it's really up to us to bring out what we think is sort of the core message, core mood, core kind of image that the composer is going for in that particular variation. And I think you could have more variations in your variations when it comes to sort of how tightly controlled versus how freewheeling and rhapsodic you are with your own kind of control and containment. I felt that you erred on the side of contained and held in. And I think there are a lot of moments in this piece that's actually quite verging on out of control and feeling very swirly and kind of ungrounded. And if it always feels so sort of like tightly controlled, we lose a little bit of that contrast between the sort of the 4/4 tolling right at the beginning of the theme and subsequent sort of this feeling. Yeah? So before we talk about that, I want to ask you about the theme. So the theme, he writes piano espressive. And I always feel that espressivo can be a little bit of a cop-out on the part of the composer. Because he's telling us, okay, play expressively. But really, any emotion or any affect that we assign music is a type of emotion. Even playing unexpressively is a type of expression, right? So it's kind of vague to say expressive, and I was wondering what you felt beyond expressive is sort of like the general emotional tone of this opening.
It feels very intimate and very kind of mysterious, like.
Yes, I agree. Intimate, mysterious, and I want to add a couple other words into your head that you can think about. One is fragile.
Mm-hmm.
And the other, I think, is tender. There's something both eerie with some of these intervals, but also kind of like, it goes with intimacy, I think, is tender. And I thought it could have a little more, maybe sadness or fragility to it. It felt quite stoic. Yeah? And I know that's hard to achieve, especially right when you're starting and you're worried about, being nervous, to then give it vulnerability kind of ups the risk a little bit. But for example, like our first 5 notes are just alternating between, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the introduction of that fourth is such a poignant set of intervals, yeah?
Right.
So for me, getting out of the kind of lock-in of these 2 notes, I think you could feel that this interval is more of a precarious reach. So it doesn't seem quite as near and convenient as the other notes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? So I think you can even experiment with a fingering that actually enhances this feeling of reaching. You could do something like, maybe something that kind of makes us feel like, are we going to get out of this F sharp E back and forth?
I see.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So also, one thing that one of my teachers, Donald Weilerstein, used to talk a lot about, especially in tender passages, is when we're trying to go for a specific sound color, we often kind of rely on our bow to do most of the work. But he used to talk about how even if we didn't use the bow, just from observing the way we touch the string with our left hand fingers, should contribute and reflect and conjure that mood that we're going for. So I felt a little bit digital the way you are playing it. I think it's so kind of like tender, fragile, delicate that maybe the way you touch the string could be a little bit more tentative rather than quite so confident. Yeah. Now, when we get to the end of the first phrase, so the piano kind of like peters out, right? The piano stops playing its constant quarter notes, just sort of like lingers, and you kind of end kind of in the middle of like, and then suddenly forte. For me, that forte is more searing, more painful, more of like a wailing outcry.
Okay.
So we start with this kind of feeling, and then we kind of just trail off into nothing, and then the piano, all our support is gone. And then you by yourself, there's no downbeat in the piano if I'm correct. You just sort of scream out, highest note yet. Ya, yada, yada, yanta. It's like all that pain that you had, that you were kind of keeping inside, suddenly explodes.
Right.
That forte felt quite comfortable and secure in its strength. I think there's something more primal about it. Yeah, more just of an outcry. Can you play for us the first, 3.5 lines again? Thinking about the fragility, thinking about the way you touch the string with your left hand, the way that phrase ends, and then suddenly the outburst of the next phrase.
Okay.
Things that I think you could think about. One is your usage of vibrato right at the beginning. So if we're trying to contrast the opening with the intensity of the forte outburst, I think the opening could be a little more feeble, and that includes in the vibrato. You're using quite an electric, which gives it a kind of, this kind of muscularity to it. I think it would be interesting, I'm not going to ask you to do it now, but to even experiment what it would sound like with no vibrato. Not saying you shouldn't necessarily end up playing it that way, but that's sort of like lost, feeble, where are we? Fragility, and then adding just a tiny bit of vibrato so it doesn't sound dead, rather than defaulting to, which gives a kind of type of intensity. Yeah.
Right.
Now, when we get to the outburst, I definitely felt the passion that you were giving it. Subtle distinction. I think there's a type of outburst as that can be characterized as, and I will triumph over this because I am sure that I will overcome this, versus I am in so much pain, I don't know whether I can cope.
Right.
And for me, this outcry is more the latter. And sort of your sound and also the way you prepare for it in that rest and the felt very, and now I'm queen of the world, yeah, versus I'm raising up my fist trying to, claw my way out of this grave that I'm in, yeah. Subtle distinction, but these small things make all the difference. Okay, so looking at Variation 1. The theme is marked modéré, moderately. Variation 1 also modéré. So it's not until Variation 2 where he says un peu moins modéré, so a little less moderately. So Variation 1 technically don't have to be kind of crazy about keeping it exactly the same tempo, but it is not a faster variation.
Right.
Actually, any sort of more activity that we want is already taken care of by the note values. I don't think we have to speed up, and it felt a bit kind of more like we were in a hurry. I think actually one thing that both of you can bring out a bit more is the sense of, well, in the theme there's no rhythmic friction, right? It's just basically quarter notes constantly, and you're exactly with that. Whereas for the first time in Variation 1, we have some sort of rhythmic friction with the presence of duples and triplets, right? So I think actually rather than having that feel more fleet and easygoing, it'll already feel like there's more activity because the note values are faster, but I think you can actually lean into the rhythmic gnarliness of it. So like there's this kind of like cross rhythm friction that is giving us this very filled in feeling rather than it's just going. Right. Yeah? Can we just try right from your entrance? And it's funny. Again, he writes espressive. So it's really up to us what that espressivo is. But for example, in measures, so you come into measure 8. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. When you have this long quasi-chromatic scale, I think that there's a lot of tension in that long line. Yeah? So it's not just sweeping. Yeah? Right from your entrance and really feel the duples against triplets. Rhythmic portion is where you have the triplets. So if anything, I think that can be, rather than leading forward, that can be really where the tension resides. So ta-ta-ta rather than ta-ta-ta-ta. Yeah? So now we go to Variation 2. And this is our first non-legato variation, right? And it's faster. Yeah. I think you could be a little spikier and more kind of cackling and more, especially at the end of the variation when the piano has ba 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 and you enter da 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 da. I think there's something really rowdy and rambunctious about that. So right when you start, I think that can be a little more like the crazy birds just cackling. Felt a little bit tightly controlled. Yeah? Be more crazy, because it's such a difference from what we just came from. Okay. Right on Variation 2? Okay. I think you could even use a more off the string stroke. It's coming across, at least through the microphone, a little bit brushy. And I think there's something more hyper about it. Yeah, pop, 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 rather than pop, 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 pop. Like, maybe there's something a little nastier about it. Yeah? Right on that again? I do feel it, but I think you can do more of sort of like the nervous expectancy. It's so much kind of like kinetic energy is getting ready to be released, yeah? Right. So there's so much drama. And when you have dia, 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 I think you can bring out those bowings more. So it's less da-ya, da-ya, ta-ya, 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 ta-ya. This whole movement, I think, is a little more angular and not quite so linear. Yeah, more jagged. Yeah. Now, question. Between the second variation and the third variation, both are quote-unquote fast variations. How would you say, what strikes you as different, importantly different, about variation 3 as compared to variation 2?
I feel like the third one is more grande. It's just more like...
More grand, yeah, I think there's definite truth in that. What really strikes me is the fact that, I guess this is for the first time in the piece, right? He is switching meters all the time.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And it's not just switching between 2/4 and 3/4. He also has 5/8, which kind of gives like, it's like we're walking and then we suddenly have like a third leg while we're walking, right? It's like this awkward extra thing. So there's this kind of like discombobulating ungroundedness about it. So I think while it is grande, I don't think it is grounded grande. I don't think it's kind of a Bachian. I think it's more like we're about to stumble at any moment. Like we're about to always do this, yeah? So it's not quite so regal.
Right.
Yeah? So he also writes avec éclat. What does éclat mean?
I don't know. I didn't look it up.
I think it means with shine. So there's something like shimmering about this, and like very often with Messiaen, there's sort of like this kind of otherworldly. Well, obviously his most famous work maybe is Quartet for the End of Time, which has very religious kind of programmatic element behind it. But even though this piece is not like that, there's this sort of like blindingly brilliant light aspect to some of his music, and I think there is that too, sort of just like. We're looking the sun straight in the face, and it's all these rays are coming at us. So there's something a little bit overwhelmingly about the shininess of that. So I think, again, we are not the master of it. It is overwhelming us. Or maybe I would even play it on the E string. I can't remember whether you did or not, but to get that shininess. Yeah, so it's more just sort of blindingly shiny. Can you try that?
Yeah.
I think one of the keys to make it more sort of rhapsodic and to sort of lean into the rhythmic, to the metric kind of ungroundedness of it is even when we have something as regular as a 2/4 bar, like bar 1, to make sure that we're not playing it ya da 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 da, but sort of like playing around the beat. So it's ya ta 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 ya ta. So it kind of has this rhythmic kind of restlessness to it, so it's not quite so square. Yeah. So I think you can, just as we make all kinds of interpretive decisions and take all kinds of liberties, we're not changing the rhythm, but we're kind of deciding how we're going to time it. Yeah. Is very different from, which could be totally viable too, but I think we want to bring out the kind of rhapsodic nature of it. Now, variation 4, I think even more urgency. Ta 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 ya ta 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 ta. When you get one small thing, I might have misheard this, but on page 4, on line 4 of page 4, we have. I think I might have heard, but I believe it's be natural. Just be careful.
Okay.
And on the next line, our pianissimo. I think you can really experiment with what sort of sound you use there. I think it could be either really soltasto. I think you could also experiment with almost quasi ponticello. Something to not make it sound like da 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 da. Really, just sort of you're just a terrifying kind of expectant texture there. Yeah. So something to kind of conjure this kind of feeling.
Right.
Anything but a healthy sound there. More imaginative with the sound palette. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, we have to wrap up, but I just wanted to say in the final variation, where we finally have the theme restated, but as opposed to piano, how many Fs? Quadruple forte.
Yeah.
With just like this tolling in the piano, just like these like exalted bells. It's true that you don't have any accents. I wonder, and you may try and feel that it doesn't line up with the way you feel about it. I wonder whether, just because it's so loud, whether it needs a little more impetus on the attacks. It was quite legato, which he doesn't say to put accents, so they're totally legitimate to play legatoli. But 1, 2, 3. Like, kind of like, and we have finally overcome. Yeah? Rather than that we're just riding this glorious wave in the piano. I think maybe that might bring out more sense of struggle.
So do you think it can go faster? Because I feel like I played it pretty slow.
I did not feel that you were too slow. I think actually there is some sort of wonderful tension that is achieved by just not, because the piano here, this is just like the tolling of the universe. They don't even know you exist, right?
Yeah.
They are just totally immovable. So I think if you kind of push it and the piano follows you, well, that somehow humanizes the piano part in a way that I don't think is really called for. I think it kind of reminds me, total opposite of the last movement of the quartet for End of Time, where again the piano is incredibly quiet rather than incredibly loud at the beginning, but also the piano is just sort of like marking time, yeah, rather than an active participant in all the wailing that you're doing, yeah.
Yeah.
So just try to kind of think about ways to broaden all ends of it, the kind of the wailing, the mysterioso-ness, the sort of like ungroundedness, so that it's not quite so tightly controlled.
Okay. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful playing, both of you. Thank you so much for playing this piece.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So looking at the program now, we have Cuna, right? Cuna and Jung-eun playing first movement of Prokofiev First Concerto. Hello.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
And is Cuna the correct pronunciation?
Yes, it's Cuna.
Cuna, okay. Great. So first movement of Prokofiev 1.
Yes.
Beautiful playing, both of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
A lot of really, again, really kind of like honest, virtuosic, very committed playing. A lot of things I really liked. The first thing I want to talk about is obviously related to this piece, but also a little bit more general, and that is moving our body when we play. And obviously that is such a personal thing because everyone does it differently, because moving our bodies both assists us in just getting the job done of getting the notes out. And so it's a technical thing that can help us, but also it's certainly an expressive thing. Depending on how we're feeling, our stance changes, facial expression, motion, all of that is tied in. And in your case, I felt at times that your body motions were getting in the way of your sound production and quality. I don't necessarily mean sound production as in volume, but sometimes you're moving around. While I understand at times why you are doing it, because it is a very kinetic passage, I felt like it was, for lack of a more advanced way of saying it, just kind of throwing your bow off track. And so, for example, if you look at the passage we're starting at 14, yappa bapa bada 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 bapa, all this kind of very notey string crossing type of passage. I felt that all the sort of motions you were doing with your body were adding another complication to what is already a complicated enough physical passage. So I don't also want to lock you in, because your own motion is a form of your expressivity. But I think you could experiment on your own with practicing it without moving, just to see if you can clean up a little bit of like the slight debris in the string crossing and some squeakiness here and there. And then also try to evaluate whether you are moving your body just out of habit, or whether it is because you're trying to get a certain emotional message across. And if it is because you're trying to get a certain emotional message across, whether it's possible for you to then do it with other means, maybe focusing that energy more in your hands or your arms or whatever, so it actually resulting in an aural difference rather than a visual difference. You know, a couple weeks ago, I was on YouTube and it suggested to me a performance of David Oistrakh playing the cadenza from the Shostakovich Concerto, which is of course a very famous video of him playing this thing. And it's just like the most like wildly energetic thing that what he does, but he's actually quite still while he does it. And that's just one example of how one can sort of like figure out a way, obviously not easy to do what he did, but of finding a way to kind of channel that energy without it being with all this extraneous motion that might get in the way of actually the sound product that you want to go for. Yeah? So something to think about. For example, also at the very end, last 3 bars, when you have you kind of, on that 8th note, 2nd note, you kind of did a big motion with your body, which gave it kind of like this accent, when actually we're in like this like very like ascendant, ethereal, pianissimo, time has sort of stopped, we're just floating. And so I'm not even sure that that motion contributed to the emotional message that you're going for. So maybe something you can experiment with, making sure that all your emotions are intentional and not getting in the way. So, what does, right at the very beginning, what does sognando mean?
I'm actually not sure.
Okay. Very important and totally understandable that you're not sure, because we don't see it very often, right? It's a pretty unusual marking. I actually can't think of, off the top of my head, another time that I've seen it. It means dreaming.
Oh, okay.
It's such an evocative, like, that the first thing he says is, you are in a dream. Yeah? So once he kind of gives us that key, I think that unlocks so much. So, you know, it just starts with just this, like, trembling, fluttering in the piano, right? There's no real, like, demarcation of rhythm. Unless you know the piece, it's hard to know where the downbeat is, what our time signature is. And then you just like out of the ether. Yeah, you're just floating in a dream. And he also marks it pianissimo. And I know, yes, it's a concerto and soloists, pianissimo and all that, but actually the real effect of this, and you hear this live in a huge hall, sitting in the audience, is it's like, wait, what's happening so far away on stage? Like, what is this barely audible magic that's happening? And I felt that you were totally awake when you played it, and I was totally awake, yeah, rather than dreaming. So I think it can be much more mysterious, but not spooky mysterious. There's something kind of very like blissful, maybe just like a child sleeping, yeah? I think there's also kind of a delicacy and tenderness to it too. It's just like a very just blissful dream, yeah? And we don't start the dream, sometimes you have dreams where like there's a clear plot and weird stuff happens, or maybe not so weird stuff happens, but something's happened. But also sometimes we have dreams where it's just like, we don't even know if anything's happening. It's just sort of like, we just start random firings of our synapses. So I feel like we don't start going anywhere plot-wise until one. Because we're with the clarinet, right? So there's this, we have a co-conspirator now, like we've joined someone. But at the beginning, I think you could be more foggy, less agenda, yeah? And keep in mind that even though we're going somewhere, we don't really have a crescendo until, where do we have our crescendo? We have a diminuendo 2 bars before 2. We have half a bar of crescendo to forte, the bar before 4, yeah? So even when we start like, that's all pianissimo, yeah? And when we get kind of bassy, all of that is pianissimo. So I think you can prolong just sort of the haziness of this a bit more, yeah? Also, another thing to think about is so much of this is, this opening is kind of smooth legato, just sort of like no articulation really, very just kind of fuzzy, until we get to bar before 2. We have these dashes on every note, right? So for different composers, dashes mean different things. I think in this case, it gives it, rather than a smoothness, a kind of like spoken parlando, pa, 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 which almost like makes it even more fragile and delicate, rather than, and we're off for a walk, yeah? So I think, really feel that your job, I think Prokofiev, maybe more than any other composer, maybe along with some French composers, he was obviously very influenced by France and French culture and art, but it's all about sort of like atmosphere and texture and color, rather than so much melody, yeah? So, of course, he did write some beautiful melodies, I'm not saying he didn't, but I think you can really focus on casting a spell. That's your job at the beginning. Can you try the very beginning and really try to show us that we're in a dream? Okay, so I'm going to stop you right there. So, while the orchestra, our pianist playing, before you started, I saw this. Like a lot of like prepping, like to like make sure that everything is right, and then we gave a nice like little kick with our bow, and then we started. So I think our body tells the story too, right? Performing is visual. I would be still. Rather than ready, set, yep, everything check, yep, okay, start. Yeah, try that again. So already I think more evocative and dreamy. I think a big improvement. I feel. You know, for me, when I'm trying to think about like what sort of color I'm trying to make with my sound, because our sound is our voice, I often imagine that I'm trying to describe the mood of the music and what tone of voice would I use. I would say something like, hey, it opens with a dream. And I feel like you are saying, I'm dreaming. It's a little bit, the tone of voice is a little bit like I'm telling someone about my dream at the other end of a big room, rather than I'm in the dream. I think your sound could be a little less focused and laser and more diffuse. Yeah? And when you get to what's happening in the orchestra?
The flutes and clarinets are having a melody, kind of.
Yes, and I think also we have the maybe there it's violas. I have a memory that it's the violas.
Oh yeah.
But in any case, we have our first melody, and you are just sort of like this kind of like firefly that's sleepily kind of dancing around the melody. And I think, again, your body language could tell more the story of the gentleness of it rather than the activity of it. Yeah? Okay, so, page 2, rehearsal number 7. We have recitando. What does recitando mean? So it sounds like the word has the same root as like reciting, right?
Yeah.
Or recitative, right? So we're kind of like, finally we're telling a story. So first we were dreaming, and the nature of it was like very like no story, just atmosphere, just hazy colors. And then we see the other side of Prokofiev, or a other side of Prokofiev, which is sort of like sassy and a bit sarcastic and sardonic and sort of like there's a bit of a swagger here. And I think now you can humanize it a little more and be a bit more kind of like swashbuckling about it. A bit more kind of just sassy and more attitude, more swag here. Yeah? Especially because with all these grace notes, there's like these are like snare drums. Tran, 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 bum, bum. There's kind of like a quiet fierceness to it, yeah? I think you could bring that out a little more. Can you start bar before that?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead. Good. So, I think what really gives it the spiciness is the dots. I think those need to be a bit crispier.
Okay.
Otherwise, the whole thing feels a little bit flabby. I think those can be a bit kind of more, again, snare drummy. Yeah? Now, we're running out of time. Just a couple more things I want to say. Once we get to... I think while there is for some people, a tradition of speeding up there, actually for me, the drama is it being held. There's like a nasty insistence and unrelentingness that I think is actually more exciting than and we're off to the races. Especially because he kind of inserts an accelerando for us by going from duples to triples at 10. So it naturally gets faster. So I think if that is really held at 9, that kind of gives us more dramatic tension. Now, the final thing I want to talk about is what is your role from 21 to the end? So first of all, what's happening in the orchestra starting at 21?
The flute comes in with the melody.
Yes, so the flute comes in with, I think, the harp plucking a little bit along. So we've got the flute, which is a very sort of like mystical sounding for lack of a better word, airy type of sound,
Yeah.
right? It's not a thick sound. It's very type of sound, and are just kind of like dings in the harp, creating like this sort of like gauzy, dreamy atmosphere. And then you are kind of just like the fog around it. We're back in a dream, yeah? Plus your concertino, plus your pianissimo. For me, this was way too muscular and athletic. I felt like you were the main deal. I think you're just sort of, you're the filter that's giving the whole thing an extra bit of color or different tint, yeah? So I think you can go in and out of audibility, and if you're too clear with your articulation, it loses the haziness of that, yeah? So also, as we get increasingly just kind of higher and higher on the violin, it's like, it's that feeling of like, you release a balloon into the sky, like you can see it. Can I still, is it there? Oh, there it is. Is it there? Is it that? No, I'm not even sure where it is anymore. That's you. Yeah? So I think actually the name of the game here is the fogginess and sort of like almost the imperceptibility of you. Yeah? Can we try right at 21 and really feel, don't worry about playing the right notes or being clear or being audible. Just contribute to the mood with your haziness. Pianissimo. Good. I still think, I don't think it's too fast. I think the tempo is fine. It sounds too fast. It's too active. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I wonder whether, maybe a lighter bow, maybe a slower bow. I'm not quite sure what the answer is, but try once really just tuning into the melody, and you just live inside the melody and around the melody. You are not your own thing unto itself. One more time. So, by any measure, this is ridiculously high on the violin. It's absurdly high. So he's just trying to create some sort of just like squeaky noise up there, yeah? And I don't think you have to worry about showing that you can play all the notes. Any question of clarity, of your ability for clarity, will be answered in the second movement. So this is just haze, yeah? So don't try to drive home every note, because that's really not the point of this, yeah? Great. Thank you so much, both of you, for your beautiful performance.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great, and now we have Xiaoman performing the G minor Bach Fugue. Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Can you see me?
Yeah, I can see you.
Hi. And am I saying your name correctly, Xiaoman?
Yes, that's correct.
Hi. Okay, so you're gonna play the fugue for us, the G minor fugue, right?
Yes.
All right. Whenever you're ready. excellent playing, Xiaoman. Really, just very well controlled, really intelligent, clear playing. A lot of things I really liked. You know, before we talk about just his movement itself, I think it's important to remember that, you know, often when we approach Bach, we're already carrying so much psychological baggage about, you know, how was it played back then? How should we play it now? With the fact are we playing on a period instrument with a period bow, or a modern instrument? Should we try, if we're playing on a modern instrument, should we try to emulate how a period instrument would sound, or should we just embrace the way our instruments sound on their own? And on top of that, it's just so difficult to play this polyphonic music on the violin, which you do so well, that because there's just all this baggage and difficulty in playing it, I think it's easy to lose sight of the fact that Bach actually is a very, very dramatic composer. There's a lot of drama in his music. Just listen to any of his passions to really hear how human and how much human emotion there is in his music. It's not just holy, godly music. It's very visceral. Yeah? Another thing that I find really interesting about these 6 sonatas and partitas, which I think speaks to their dramatic nature, is if you look at, and this might be interesting for anyone who is curious about these sonatas and partitas, if you look at a facsimile of the manuscript, and if you own, for example, the international edition, the Galamian edition, the second half of it, they reprint a copy of the score. And on the title page, it says in Bach's handwriting, sei solo per violino senza accompagnata, or something like that, which has been translated as sei solo, 6 solos per violino, for violin, senza accompagnata, without accompaniment. And that's the way it's always been translated, but actually, so I think sometime in the 80s or something, someone came along and said, hold on, sei, well, maybe they knew this before them, but sei solo does not mean 6 solos. It should be sei soli, because soli is plural. And people have always said, well, Bach wasn't Italian, it wasn't his native language, so he just made a grammatical error. He meant sei soli, 6 solos, rather than sei solo. But then a few decades ago, someone came along and said, you know, hold on, Bach actually was very educated and spoke Italian well enough that he would not have made such a basic error as solo instead of soli. On top of that, he wouldn't have made such a basic error on something as important as the title page to this massive collection. So, these people said, what happens if we actually translate Bach at his word, rather than assuming he made a mistake? Now, sei, in addition to being the Italian word for 6, is also the second person singular of the verb to be. So it's sei means you are. So sei solo actually means you are alone. So the title of this entire collection is not 6 solos for violin without bass accompaniment. It is You Are Alone for violin without bass accompaniment. So it's this very evocative, personal title, like basically saying this whole collection of 6 pieces is a life's journey. You are alone, and you are having to go through life contending with all the obstacles and fears and all the joys and triumphs that we all experience all on your own. And for me, that gives me goosebumps, thinking that we've been maybe misinterpreting what he wrote, thinking he meant 6 solos, which is not that interesting a title, instead of You Are Alone. So if we look at sort of the dramatic, speaking of drama, the dramatic arc of a lot of stories, take a Shakespeare play. Usually like there's kind of something introductory, and then there's an escalation of dramatic tension, and then kind of in the middle, Act 3, there's like some sort of climax, and then there's sort of a denouement where like things resolve. And if it's a comedy, everyone gets married at the end. If it's a tragedy, everyone dies at the end, right? And if you look at this 6, you know, there's sort of a curtain raiser, once upon a time. Kind of the curtain rises, and the exact midway point is the chaconne. The most dramatic, largest scale, most epic out of all the movements. And then after the chaconne ends on a D. D minor. The next note is the first note of the third sonata. So it's like he's saying, now from D, we go down to C. Now we're descending. And then we think about the way all 6 end. Ends with, right? It's a celebration. It's the most light, the most virtuosic, the most happy, joyful. So it's kind of like the party at the end of the journey, after a life lived. So to keep in mind that this music, I think, is about life and about our experiences. So I think you can be a bit more brave with injecting it with be less objective, be more subjective with how you play this music. More about you and what you think he's trying to say in very human terms. Yeah? Now, a fugue. The word fuga or fugue seems to have 2 roots, 2 Latin words, which escape my memory. It's something like fugare and fugere, I can't remember. But they mean 2 things. To flee, as in to run away from, or to chase. So one of them is the one running away, the other one is the one chasing after, right? So there's this kind of, it's constantly in motion, and it's very active, and it's like always running. And for me, your performance of it was quite grounded and stationary and dignified. Like very commendable in its control, but I think there's more activity and subjectivity and drama in it. Yeah? Another thing is, I got the feeling that you were feeling it in 4. Bum 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 2, 3, 4, 1, right? But it's in cut time, right? So actually, after the downbeat, which is a rest, the next beat is not until the 4th note. Bum 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 pum bum 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 pum, which means that the first 3 notes have to lead to the 4th note. And for me, that figure bum 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 pum was not directional enough. Yeah? So make sure that you feel it's bum 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 pum 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 pum. And I think just that little bit of restless forward motion on those pickups totally changes it from bum bum pum 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 to pum 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 pum. Yeah? So there's more of a kind of urgency, maybe even sneakiness. Remember, we're fleeing, we're running away, or we're chasing. Or maybe we're being chased. Yeah? So in terms of the character, we finish the previous movement. An organ plays that, right? That's organ music. And then yeah, it's very kind of like this type of music, very dodging. This type of feeling, yeah? So we kind of had a little outburst, and then someone just covered our mouth, and then we're back to piano. Now, a fugue is necessarily, there are all these rules, right? This voice does it, and this voice imitates it, then this voice has to enter at such and such an interval. So finally, when we escape that cage, I think you can be more free and freewheeling and rhapsodic and sort of generous when we get to I think there's more activity going on. Yeah? So, can you try the very beginning and really feel, remember, you are fleeing, you are running away, or you are chasing. And it's this, you can't see my whole body, but it's not this, it's this. Yeah? And remember that there are only 2 beats per measure. Try it again. So to me, this felt like there was more good nervous energy in it, more fuga fleeing feeling. Now, if we think about these 16th notes, it's 16th notes in an allegro tempo in cut time, right? So that's quite fast, right? Like a lot of fast 16th notes are still written in 4/4, but this is in 2/2. So that makes it feel even faster. So I think it can even feel more verging out of control, more hurtling rather than controlled, more kind of just tumbling along. Yeah, it's more just spiraling, I think. Yeah? Now, speaking of drama, when you get to, what is this, measure 38. That has to feel like you're standing on the beach and you see this cathedral rising out of the water, just like that feeling, yeah? I think there's so much tension in this D pedal. And now these bass notes, incredibly dramatic. These are just like waves crashing into the cliffs. There's nothing tidy about it, I think. Nothing neat and in a box, yeah? Now, a couple other things I want to say. When we have our cadence downbeat of 64, what key are we in here? We have, we're in B flat major, right? I think you can be, so obviously that's like a kind of comforting, and we are finally in the relative major. Ah, perfect authentic cadence. And then I think we're immediately a little bit lost. I think you can bring out sort of the non-polyphonic kind of searching meandering of kind of like are we gonna go here? No. Oh, maybe we go here. Oh, how about here? Oh, no. Oh, maybe and then we start finding our way. Felt a little bit like the train kept going. You did take a little bit of time, but I felt like there were train tracks and we knew exactly where we were going. I think this can be more, after all the drama, we're kind of just like empty and we're just like, now I'm lost and I need to find my way. Yeah? Now, when we finally have you see where I am, measure 87, right? Near the end. Yeah? So if this were the mirror of measure 42, which is circle of fifths, right? We have, right? Descending by fifths. Whereas here, if it were the same thing, he would have or something like that. But he has a G pedal, yeah? So there's something even more insistent and sort of fatalistic about this repeated G. It's incredibly dramatic and it's so much like this. Yeah? Nothing regal or dignified or orderly about it. Yes? So, I think you can bring that out more. Feel the license, the permission to be incredibly extravagant and broad with your expressive range, your expressive palette, because this music is about life. You are alone. Yeah? It is not like some sort of like tidy work. It's just expressing everything there is to express in the world because it involves all of life. Yeah? So try to free yourself to find that. Yeah? Thank you so much for your beautiful playing and bringing this piece to us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And our last performer is playing a bit of the Brahms Concerto First Movement. This is Idunn, am I saying that correctly? With Jung-eun again on piano?
Yes, so Stefan, we're just going to adjust the piano a little bit for this last one.
Okay.
Kind of center it a little bit more. So just give us about a minute here to do that.
Hello.
Hello.
And you're Idunn, right?
Yes.
Am I saying that correctly?
Yes. Very well.
Idunn. Okay, great. And so how much of the Brahms do you want to play? I might stop you just after the either exposition or development. Do you have a place where you want to go until?
I've played, like, I was going to play it until after the development if there's time, and if not, then...
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, both of you. Really, really excellent. Okay, so first I just want to talk about this piece, but then I sort of want to like zoom out a little bit and just sort of talk about like practicing and stuff like that. So I think it's, for me, one thing that's kind of helped me make sense of what this concerto is about is thinking that a kind of driving force behind the drama in this piece is the dramatic tension between German symphonic Brahms and Hungarian Romani Zigeuner Joachim. Yeah? So we have sort of like the main theme, da, ya, da, 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 which could totally be like something from a symphony, like da, da, ya, da, ya, da, da, like similar in nature to the Second Symphony. And then you have, on the flip side, this Hungarian, he loved Hungarian music, and he loved Joachim, who was Hungarian. This very kind of like devil-may-care, kind of virtuoso, almost kind of like quasi-exotic feeling. Yeah, and I think there's sort of like these two worlds, these two genres coexisting, these two moods coexisting, is a lot of what makes this music special, and I think it also helps to try to have a clear idea of what we're trying to bring out in each situation. So, for me, I got more of the sort of Germanic, symphonic warmth and kind of this feeling from your performance than I got the sort of like swashbuckling Hungarian feeling. And I think when you have something like, can be more extreme in its sort of ness, yeah? So it's not quite so self-contained. For example, also, right after that, when you have all of that, you're completely alone until until the orchestra starts laying down bum, 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 bum. So I think there's actually room for you to be quite free and rhapsodic with, rather than nothing's happening there. I think this is you just sort of like being that Hungarian violinist. Yeah? And also in the beginning of the development, when you have there's a real sort of like, what comes to mind for me is like there's a real kind of like Hungarian, or in that case, Zigeuner lamenting quality, right? Yeah, I think there can be more of this tragedy involved, yeah? One thing that also I think you can think about is your entire opening until you reach everything up to that point is, in essence, a bridge. You're trying to get, well, you start out in D major, you do get to, sorry, D minor, you do get to D major earlier, you get there. Fine, you got to D major, but you haven't yet stated the theme. You're still playing around the theme. So I wasn't totally convinced by there was kind of like a lot of time, and then you kind of restarted once the piano, like you kind of made the pianist wait to get back in. For me, I mean, not much is happening there. You're just arpeggiating one chord, right? So I wouldn't make such a big deal. It's not really an arrival. It's not any sort of harmonic arrival. It's not really a thematic arrival. I would keep the ball rolling a little bit, yeah? So, right at the beginning, I think even you can bring out more of the storminess of, the most quintessential Brahms rhythmic profile is duples warring with triples, right? That rhythmic friction of 2 against 3 is like the essence of Brahms in some sense. So we have it right at the beginning, right? So I think you can feel the fight of, there's a lot of drama in that fight of the 2s against 3s. So you really feel more resistance. And then you have ba-bam, bam. I felt in the beginning that your entrances didn't feel connected enough and reacting enough to what was happening in the orchestra. So you play yup up 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 bum ba bum bum yum bum bum bum. I heard ba bum bum yum bum bum bum, like your thing was kind of something separate. So they play ba bum ba yum bum bum bum, and really remember that that's syncopated. Yum bum bum bum. So there's even more of this sort of like ungrounded feeling. And when you start this thing, ba bum, ba bum, ba bum, bum, really feel that each of you is making the other level up. Ba 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 bum, ba bum, ba 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 yum, ba dum, ba 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 yum, ba dum. Felt a little bit like rather than bouncing off each other, you were just sort of like coexisting. So really try to feel like you're egging each other on some more. Yeah? One question I have for you is, when you finally get to the theme, oh, one other thing. I think you could even dawdle a little less. I know there's a tradition of kind of really indulging there, but not much, not big arrival there. We're still a long way to go. Still not arriving. Still haven't arrived. I'm not saying you have to rush through it, but maybe recognize that the ball is still rolling, yeah? When you get to the theme, da, ya, da, 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 does the first, is it da, ya, da, 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 or is it da, ya, da, da? Is 2 in the wake of 1, or does measure 1 lead to measure 2?
The second version that you...
Measure 1 leads to measure 2.
Right.
For me, I agree with you. I think measure 1, that D could kind of spin and long for the F sharp more. I think there's a beauty to that growing. For example, when you have this sort of like Germanic arpeggiation, and then Hungarian. So those shifts, I think, can be a little bit more dramatic, yeah? And even when the orchestra's playing dum, bum, 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 and you're just playing... I think that can also be more feisty and warring and bring out the quasi-hemiola more, yeah? All of these kind of things, I think, can be brought a little bit more. Now, what is our second theme? Is that the theme?
Well...
Yada, yada,
Yeah, right.
yada, yada, right? So if we think about how that theme arrives, it's actually quite breathtaking, right? Because you are just arpeggiating around the orchestra. And the orchestra has these long slurs. Da, ya, da, da, da. And then we have this weird, this diminished chord. We don't really know where we're going. And then after all these long slurs, we have these short slurs. So I think there can be a little more danciness to that. Yeah, kind of like a Austrian like Ländler, like a kind of like folk song. Da, ya, da, da, ya, da, da, something a little more lilting about it. What does lusingando mean? We have here dolce lusingando. Dolce obviously meaning sweet. Lusingando means, unusual word, it means sort of like teasingly or coaxingly or like kind of like slightly seductively, but also maybe there's something a little bit like, come here, like a kind of like slight, I don't know, not sinister, but kind of like, there's something kind of flirtatious about it, but maybe not quite so good-natured as flirtatious. So, but at the same time, it's sweet, and it is piano. So I think maybe it could be a little more atmospheric. And there's no crescendo. Suddenly, like, a hand comes up from the grave, like, reaching out. Yeah, nothing prepares us for that. Now, all of this, something for you to think about, those two kind of differing ideas, the Germanic or kind of symphonic and the more Hungarian aspects of it. Tell me how you go about practicing. What is sort of like your, when you know, okay, I'm going to start with the first page today. What is your practice routine look like?
I work in sections.
In sections, okay, you work in sections. Within each section, how are you doing it? Like, what's this? Is there like a system to it?
I'm not really sure how to answer that. I don't know.
Okay, I mean, there doesn't have to be a set system. You know, obviously we kind of revise our practicing based on what we need. My feeling is that there were more accidents than maybe you expected to happen. And of course, I could be wrong because this is my first time I've ever heard you play, and I don't know you very well. But I think your playing would be taken to a higher level if you could eliminate some of the accidents. Of course, we are all human, and there's nothing wrong with making mistakes, but we do want to try to minimize them when possible. I think what might be helpful is for you to experiment playing through huge chunks, like it's a performance, at between 50 to 80% of your final tempo. Mm-hmm. So rather than obsessing about little, like, oh, this, you know, yes, those octaves are difficult and everything, but just saying to yourself, I'm going to play from my first entrance until up to there. No matter what happens, I'm going to play it through like a performance, but at 60% of my tempo. Maybe doing it with metronome to force yourself to keep the tempo. If you trust yourself not to use the metronome, just get the tempo and turn it off. And just sort of like processing, getting through all of that, I think is a bit of a different skill set from practicing just this shift or just that little string crossing in it. Obviously, I've never watched you practice, so I don't know, maybe you're already doing that, but if you're not, I think, you know, we all have this phenomenon of like, we think we know a passage, we can play it perfectly on its own, and then we go and play it in context and it falls apart. And I think because it's a different skill set to play a huge chunk at a time rather than being able to play just a little bit at a time. So that's something that I think might be helpful for you, is doing huge chunks. Sometimes I even do an entire movement. Today, for example, I'm preparing the Beethoven Concerto. I played the entire first movement at like 80 or 90% tempo. So there's an element of more control than I actually will do it, but still I'm having to get through the entire thing and the fatigue that goes with that, and just sort of like one note after another, rather than giving myself permission to stop. Oh, that was wrong. Oh, I'm going to stop there. Of course, you need both. You can't just play through, but I wonder if a little more play-through practice might help you. Do you also practice playing through like it's a performance a lot?
Yeah.
I think you should continue doing that, because that as I said, is a different skill and also highlights things that you may not have known that you needed work on. But there were some mistakes where I don't think it's actually a lack of practice or an imprecision of technique. It was just maybe nervousness or just unused to playing it or something, like even little things like fingers falling off the fingerboard, which has nothing to do with technique or accuracy, it's just an accident. And maybe those things might be eliminated with a little more controlled, large section practicing, yeah? Some things to tinker with. Obviously, we all have different things that help us, and we all have to keep tinkering, but you might want to try that, yeah? Thank you so much for your beautiful performance. Really enjoyed it. And thank you as well for joining us for two of our violinists. Bravo, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stefan. That was so great. That was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. In particular, what you were talking about with the Bach, and giving a linguistics lesson of sorts, that became something very profound. Yes, it's like kind of a mind-blowing thing.
It gives me goosebumps, the whole, like, you're alone, and that's what the title of this piece is.
Yeah. And in fact, I think I saw that your next Stefan session is specifically on with Bach.
Yes,
right?
thank you for the plug. For those who don't know, a little free advertising from Hank. I have this series called Stefan Sessions. It's about once a month. In each session, I focus on one work. We've done a few concertos, and we're going to be doing the E major partita. It's on April 26th, and in each session, I feature between 3 and 4 musicians who audition online by submitting YouTube videos. More info on my website, stefanjackiw.com. It's free to apply, free to attend if you just want to watch. It's on Zoom, so please check it out.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Stefan. And it doesn't look like we have questions. I mean, we've had a few dozen people watching, but I guess everyone's being really shy. So I know it's getting late over there on the East Coast. So I'll just, I can wrap up with a question that I have, and typically a question that I ask, any sort of guest artists that we have online during what, has been relatively a difficult time for many of our students, which is, what do you hope for the next generation of musicians? And what last words of advice would you have?
Kind of like something I've been thinking with the Bach, for example, we're talking about, like, give yourself permission to be free and to be kind of adventurous, and to give yourself the license to kind of, well, for lack of a better term, think outside the box in terms of how to interpret this Bach. I think also what I've learned in this year is about being more adventurous and creative about how you get your work out there. One thing that it's been really gratifying to see is how creative people have been with Zoom and pre-recording, and even just like going live on Instagram, posting clips on Instagram, having a unannounced Q&A on Instagram, collaborations over Instagram or Facebook or wherever. All these things, just sort of like embrace it. There are no rules about what is a good or acceptable or unacceptable way of sharing this music. Whatever gets it out there, I think is wonderful. And what I've seen is that people are also very creative in how they want to consume music. A lot of us at the start of this said, wow, who's going to really watch a live streamed masterclass? The sound's not going to be great, or who's going to watch a live stream concert? Why would I watch something on Instagram when it's nothing compared to a CD that I can, buy, or a recording that I can buy off iTunes? But people do. People want to see and hear stuff. So kind of be encouraged by that and try to find new ways or embrace ways that people around you are getting their work out there.
That's great, Stefan. So I guess the advice is, keep posting on Instagram, or I guess it's TikTok now, right? A lot of people.
I guess so, yeah. And I think, one thing that for me, that was a big part of, that was helpful for me when I was a student, was playing for friends. The nervousness of that and the feedback and just sort of like forcing myself to do it was a really important part of the learning experience. And there's no reason why that can't happen, even if you're not, in a practice room with someone. Just set up a camera and on Zoom, or just start streaming it, and, you'll get that same performance buzz, I think.
Right, yeah, keep playing for others, everyone.
Yeah, keep playing, exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much again, Stefan. And I hope, maybe someday we can get you out here to the West Coast.
That would be awesome.
And actually, get you here in person, which would be really great. But
thanks
again. Have a great night.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.